G'day friends and fans, welcome to the Ukraine War Update for the 27th of November 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate. Now when I started covering this war, I, like a lot of people, saw Russia sit there for 6 weeks. A lot of people, I saw a disconnect with a lot of people reporting different things. And I think people are now in heavily divided camps, believing what they want to believe, even when someone else has something completely different to say. And we see this now in Ukraine, a growing opposition to the war, growing opposition groups who are not united, but in their own way. Some of them want the war to end rapidly, while others believe that Zelensky's just the wrong person to bring about the end. But they're not getting much traction. Right now, the only person other than Zelensky who seems to have traction in this is Zelensky's chief of staff. Now, as I've said, he's the architect of Zelensky's rise and is the cause of Zelensky's pending fall, because if Zelensky cannot give Ukraine a soft landing, he is going to bear the brunt of this, not Yamarick. This is why hidden powers remain hidden. They don't want to be seen in public. They don't want the fallout. They don't want to be Bill Gates, although they're probably richer than Bill Gates, but still. They don't want... they're probably quite happy to throw him to the wolves. If they could. That's yet still a possibility. But Bill Gates is a small player in this. The Soros Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, all the NGOs that set up in Ukraine spread this pro-Eurocrat crap. These false promises. Now, you think Ukraine would know better, but see, they thought they'd be the next Poland. And then again, they're not even the next Romania. They wish they were the next Serbia, and they're close to being the next Serbia. I don't know if you would believe this or not, but I think Western intervention in Ukraine is not going to go Ukrainians' way. I do honestly think Ukraine has made such a mess of itself that the European powers don't know what to do. But once they figure it out and start realizing that their failures can only be bailed out by an outsider, and they let Trump fix this mess, because right now they're totally against everything. They are stalling the peace process, but there's still hope. However, before we continue with the peace process, let's take a look at the map as it stands. Now, I've seen different percentages. Let's take it as a given that it's 1/5 of Ukraine. Okay? It sounds reasonable. It doesn't change by much per day. And really, we do know that it's possible that these little areas in the north are just, shall we say, chess pawns. Yes, it'd be reasonable to think that they're pawns. Now, there's been no movement in the north, no advances. There's been activity, but no advances. The Kerpiet situation is frozen at the crossroads. There is not much going on north of Lyman. And this area has been stalled for some time. But now and again they'll make little changes, but overall the strategy of hit and run. Well, it's actually not. See, most of these engagements are a truck pulls up, artillery is unhitched, artillery fires off rounds, the artillery moves on. Now and again, it's a tank. Now and again, it's a group of tanks. Now and again, it's rockets. It's very low intensity. It depends what the commander has and what's available in the second line for him to play with. Most of the front line are trenches, heavy machine guns, and light artillery. Just enough to make a noise and hold out until relief arrives. Now, Ukraine has not been able to launch a successful counteroffensive everywhere. They have been able to halt a few advances and hold out, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. But eventually the Russian war machine grinds and, as you can see here, explodes and sets up a new trench line. Now, fighting continues on the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. Fighting continues here. The Russians have made some advances into Kosk. They've taken more territory in southern Kosk. They've taken a lot of territory south of Kosk. There's still a few holdouts here. There's still a few holdouts here, but the Russians have made a little bit of activity. They've taken this former airbase. It had been evacuated months ago. Most of it, evacuated of key personnel and aircraft. It was mostly a army base, despite its wings. It was a resupply point for the battle of the surrounding area, but then it just became an obstacle for the Russian army's advance on Kosk. Now, it still is sort of an obstacle. It's not. I don't think it's captured. I think it's only under fire control. Fire control means that Russia can not only hit it at every square inch, but could fire over it. So it could pretty much control it, but does not occupy it. This means that it's front line. No man's land between the front line. But Ukrainians, I think, have evacuated and fallen back. There's no confirmed or denied report. Most of the reports that people are putting out are speculation, or they're looked up on Wikipedia and seeing some unit numbers here and there. Now, a lot of that is misinformation. You actually see sometimes different unit numbers. It was recently reported that the 58th in Pavlovsk was reported inactive. According to some reports now on the Kiev Independent, there's still 5,000 members active in Pokrovsk. Yet, according to the Russians, there's less than 1,000 Ukrainians left in Pokrovsk. Now, the Russians reported some advances. Now, they're only minor here in the area of Myriad. Indian News, for some reason, and was it the Telegraph or Sun? One of the two had half of Pokrovsk in the hands of the Russians, though only a small amount. I don't know where they get, because it is this whole area, not just this little part here in the north. Now, unless they mistook it for Roddy, but yeah, they only have half. They do have half of Roddy. They've taken all of Krasny weeks ago. There's still a little bit of fighting in this area as they cut this line through here of resupplying Ukrainians. Now, I'm surprised they haven't put out yet another "we've rescued Dobronilia" from the Russians. But I think Zelensky's too weary. I think too many people are sick of these "we saved a town," only to find out later that the Russians were nowhere near it. But the Ukrainians have lost more territory here. The Russians have almost completed their operation to clear out the Ukrainians, to protect their flanks, and also put this whole counteroffensive that was weeks ago to an end. They've pushed the Ukrainians back. They will undoubtedly, depending on the battlefield, try to what do they call it? Stabilize the line. To put up, because that stabilized line becomes their second line, then third line as the Russians advance, and then in their eyes becomes permanent Russian territory. Now, right now, this whole area, right? Most of this is still referred to as disputed territory. And one of the things in the peace deal is, what's Russia giving up other than stopping the killing? Again, you're forcing your ideology onto others. That's not how war works. It's why, you've got to stop making assumptions. You've got to stop demanding others conform to your will. Russians are looking at you right now and going, but we're winning. And so many people, you got the Lindsey Grahams of this world who they're just Democrats, right? They're sore losers. They can't accept reality. They think, I'm a US senator. Everything I say is word of God. I bark and the world trembles. That is Lindsey Graham. And this corporate establishment is so used to obedience from the masses, and the corporate media is giving the illusion that there's still a mass obedience, but the reality is there's a mass growing disobedience. And it seems to be, the more the corporate media doubles down on ignoring the concerns of the youth, who see no value whatsoever for them to go to war, to lose their life for what? So that more foreigners get to enjoy the luxuries of life? Because that's the way they see it for the last 75 years. Americans gone to war and gotten poorer for it. And in debt. Now, not all the debt, but a large chunk of it definitely is COVID. A lot of people forget that. Bailing out the boomers because market, or whatever, market, the mighty god of GDP. And you may think that it's only Russia that's after the resources of Ukraine. You forget, Europe started this war to, as Lindsey Graham said, he told you, we started this so Putin couldn't get his hands on resources. The reality was, Ukraine, having sold its oil rights to try and pay its debts, just turned around and got into more debt. You were arming Ukraine for war. Just like all around the world right now, there's various talks of war. Ukraine is a manufactured war of consent. They repeat over and over again the trumpets of war, telling you that Putin is bad, we must protect American interests. But Biden and Obama and to some extent Trump, nobody, mostly it's the Senate, most of it, the barking comes from the Senate, the same people in the Senate every time, Schumer and Lindsey Graham, but always they cannot define these said interests. Why is Burisma important? Why is bailing out Ukraine important? Well, it does have a lot to do with alleged rare earth materials, although those were on offer from Russia. And there are other countries who are offering. But right now, Russia has taken a huge chunk out of Ukraine again, and not only have they advanced, they are butted up against all of, the greater area of Hulapol, and have breached the outskirts of the town. They've breached the first line on the outskirts. They've crossed the river here. And they are cutting off. Well, they're basically on both banks completely. But they're close to cutting off the town from the north. They've not made much progress here in the north, though they've overrun a few positions. And they're back to cross the river here and butting up to southern Orkiv. They've made progress here on the road to Zelesnky. Now, they can expand and probably this is part of their cauldron tactics. But here you have areas of relatively peace where there's only a few tit-for-tats every day. But the main thing is you pull out. There's been only a few drone attacks on Russia by Ukraine. There's been no successful attacks on Ukraine today. Sorry, Ukraine has made no successful attacks on Russia, but Russia's made a few successful attacks, again by using overwhelming numbers. Now, I found earlier on my phone, but I couldn't find the website. Now, Sweden is offering to produce micro missiles. These are a new air-to-air missile for drones. These are carbon fiber. Apparently they will cost a lot less than your traditional air-to-air missile. And that would be of great benefit, considering that one of the problems with defending Ukraine has been the extraordinary cost of launching various missiles at Russian drones, given the low cost of the Russian drones and the high frequency of Russian drone attacks. Though the cost of damage can be high from a drone, the problem is the cost of defending Ukraine has brought their debt to around $400 billion. And another $100 billion by the end of next year, roughly, Ukraine is only roughly contributing around 20. Some estimates put it at 54, but I think it's as low as 26. There's evidence to suggest that since 2022, Ukraine's reserves have been bled dry. We don't know exactly how much gas, oil, and these financing deals are legitimate. We've seen this before. We're going to buy 100 jets. How many times? So the Griffin deal, the Grad deal, the Abrams deal, all these deals turn from hundreds of F-16s down to 16 donated, And though, seriously, 100 Rafales would do tremendous in the hands of any skilled pilot. But it takes a decade to master an aircraft. It doesn't happen overnight, even for skilled pilots who go from fighter pilots. They still undergo training when they go from one aircraft to another. They don't just hop aboard unless they're that skilled. Even then, they still have to know the layout. It's not like they sit down and go, oh yes, I know what that is. Although if they can, then they're worth their weight in gold. But I'm just saying, for all research and all indicators are that Ukraine right now is only in the early stages of training pilots for the Rafale, and it looks like they won't arrive in time to make a difference in the Ukraine war. But yes, there are articles and YouTubers claiming they will. That's fine. You can make all the claims you want. It seems to work with the viewers. The more outrageous the claim, the more viewers, right? Yet ultimately, I still yet to be proven right though, but I do think a lot of these YouTubers are going to collapse soon, because you can't keep promising Ukraine's victory, and you can't keep claiming all these things are going to happen and then just fall silent on it. Eventually people are going to start seeing the pattern. But I just think for now the liars have found people willing to be lied to. And that's danger for Ukraine, because Ukraine cannot defend itself adequately if it is lying about its situation on the ground. Now, this happened in the Sino-Vietnam War. The generals were telling Mao and not Mao, his successor, Mao's successor, Dong, that everything was fine, when it wasn't. And that they didn't need reinforcements, when in fact they were desperately short of ammunition and needing reinforcements, and they were losing officers. And the Vietnamese found that every time they'd shoot an officer, the soldiers who were so trained to be obedient would just carry him back to the base. They didn't know what to do. So sniping became a big issue. Now, this is on a slightly different scale, but Russia is targeting Pacific people to running this war, and they're not targeting the top. They don't care about the top. They care about the various key command positions. And this seems to be a growing pattern, that when a drone attack, a few days of drone attacks, Russia makes advances, and it continues. Every time you hear about blackouts, soon after blackouts comes a missile attack. Now, it's usually only 1 or 2 missiles. Russia is so surgical with its attacks. And yes, a lot of it does have to do with keeping their cost down. They're looking at the price of victory, and yes, they're running this war on a shoestring budget. But again, Ukraine is paying 2 to 3 times the Russian budget for a lesser outcome. But still, one of the reasons why Russia is not doing as well, the rumor is, and there's no solid evidence that Putin is pushing generals out of windows every week or stuff like that. Yet people believe it, right? I think there's only been 9, and 7 of those have turned out to be murders carried out by Ukrainian agents. But again, Ukraine has bragged openly about killing people in Russia. Again, not a thing that gets retaliations, and often, Russia doesn't publicize its retaliations, which is weird because in the 60s it would parade the retaliation. But this is a different Russia. So you have to treat things slightly differently. And I'm telling you, right, from my observations, a pattern is clearly emerging. Right? The only thing stopping Ukraine, now, maybe if there was a Western intervention, you don't need to send troops in the Ukraine. Just merely double the number of Bradleys and M2s. And perhaps adapt some drones with more precise anti-personnel, and instead of firing out minefields for the Russians to clear, you have anti-personnel drones. And again, you could cheapen Ukraine's air defenses. Well, Sweden's low-cost missiles might be a good idea. But another one, I kept telling you, some of the trainer aircraft, just throw some guns on them and shoot down. You can shoot down half a dozen easy with bursts of 30 cal. But they don't seem to be interested in low-tech solutions, which does fuel the rumour that they're delaying the Ukraine war to get some weapons testing in, and that Lindsey Graham has just been a tool of the military-industrial complex, which an accusation that has been levelled at him multiple times a year for his entire career. And that has come at the expense of Ukrainian lives, which I keep asking people who support Ukraine, why do you support dying Ukrainians? And they say, Ukrainians don't die, the Russians are dying. This is the problem. You cannot communicate with people who do not live in reality. This is not a Russian map. And you need to know what the Russians are thinking, but no, they don't. Apparently, if you're a liberal, you can read the mind of others. So, allegedly, you just look at this picture and say, the Russians are obviously targeting civilians. Now, this is a repeated picture. Irrelevant to the story. But that is Al Jazeera and the rest of the mainstream media. But we are beggars, and beggars cannot be choosy when it comes to sources of information about a war, with both sides concealing lots of information. But Russia says talks to the Ukraine war are serious but rules out concessions. There is a disconnect between what Russia and Ukraine and what Russia and America and what Turkey and what Europe have all reported, but there is no Russia-Ukraine talks. There is trilateral talks, a three-way conversation. Ukraine, tell Putin he's a poo-poo head. Steve Witkoff turns to Putin. Putin says, tell Zelensky he's a dickhead. And that's the way it goes. They won't talk to each other. They'll hurl insults most of the time. They will not deal with, and some of them just flat out, right? It's not just Zelensky. There's teams of negotiators, and they all have varying opinions. They've all given, whether it's Putin's secretary, the foreign minister, foreign ministry spokesperson, the time of day. This is an ongoing, changing, fluid situation. what you heard this morning and what you hear now is not going to be the same tomorrow. And it's getting people to the point where they're tuning out because they don't know, or they hear or they just hold on to the first thing they hear. And that's a very dangerous habit to have. Now, Donald Trump put forward a 28-point plan. Ukraine allegedly whittled that down to 26. But when presented to its European allies, they had an epileptic fit. And when presented to the Russians, they put a line through giving Ukraine nothing. Right? We're not giving them any money. But they agreed that Ukraine has to give up land. What a shock, right? But hey, just because you went into Iraq and you gave up land, that you didn't do that in Serbia, did you? You're going to give up Kosovo? You're going to give Kosovo back to Serbia? Still waiting for an answer on that one. See, this is the problem. People who have opinions first need to demonstrate that they're trustworthy and that they uphold the beliefs they espouse. The vast majority of people out there do not seem to have that. No, sorry, I should say the vast majority of politicians do not seem to have a virtuous trait. You know, the H in Democrat stands for honesty. And yet, people keep voting for the liberal establishment because they're so brain dead when it comes to, because they hear it over and over again. We are defending democracy. We are defending democracy. So the German Chancellor wants to defend democracy. But at the same time, he wants to end this war quickly. Well, what do you mean by quickly? Do you mean the atomic solution? The appeasement solution? The go in rapidly with 6,000 tanks and suddenly find out Russia has 10,000 tanks? Please, tell me, what is the actual solution? Right now you have a want. This sounds more like a desire. A desire is like, okay, wants and needs, right? There's things you want and there's the things you need. Desires, these are just purely things for pleasure that have no basis in reality of wants and needs, right? There's no desire will guarantee your survival, whereas wants will at least make your survival comfortable, okay? There's a difference. Desires are pleasure, wants are comfort, okay? Now, is this a want because it will make life easier, or is it a desire? It will give him a little chip on his shoulder that he can say, see, I ended the Ukraine war quickly. I'm a powerful man. Please, little lady, come into my parlour, said the spider to the fly. But really, we are great powers. And then, but we need approval. Of whom? Ukraine? Not just Ukraine, US and Russia. So, no. This is the problem. They want to act that this is the 19th century. Napoleon's got his foot on the desk. But remember, when Napoleon was swinging his dick and telling everybody to bow and scrape to him, they all ganged up on him. So, there is no morality, only power. And a peace deal has to have concrete concessions from Russia, but not as many as those from Ukraine, because that's how war works. When you're the winner, you get to say, mine. That is what a war is. It is putting your finger on the map and saying, mine, and then when everybody else disagrees, you kick their ass. That is what's happened. They are crying about having their ass kicked. They thought that a war on half the budget at 3 times the price would somehow beat Russia, which has failed how many times now? You cannot underfund a war, you cannot overcharge for a war, and you cannot underfight a war. They were told by experts already in 2022. Make peace or throw everything at, including the kitchen sink at Russia. It's one or the other. Right? They did neither. They will blame Trump. This is the whole point of this politicking. This whole war isn't just about grinding down you, not just about grinding Ukraine so that there's no opposition to the liberal establishment, but it's also about weakening Russia's position in the world, saying that my weapons are better than your weapons, so everybody will buy my weapons. But Europe has been the loser, except in the Rafale jet, and that is only a comeback thanks to the purchase of the jet by India, who distrusted the Chinese proposal after being told the same thing by America. See, when America sells the F-35, it comes with conditions. Same with most jets. Chinese, you have to transport them back to our factories and have them fixed by our people. What about software upgrades and integrations? No. You cannot look at the source code. France made a lot of concessions to India and other countries since, and have sold jets. They basically offer a Rafale Light. That's just the airframe and weapon systems, but it's customized. You use a certain weapon, they create the mounts, they create the logistics and etc. You provide the workers and they provide the spare parts. Customizations, you have to provide those parts, but the software, it's pretty much looks like they make it to integrate into your systems. So they make concessions, right? That's why they got the contracts around the world. But one of the things was, particularly with comes to training, which I think is why Ukraine went with the Rafale, is that they're pretty much picking up the free training of pilots, because but it's not exactly free. You pay a deposit, and when that money runs out, will Ukraine be able to make the second round of funding? That's the question now, isn't it? But it does depend on the peace talks, because remember, the peace talks don't just end the war. It ends the cost. It ends the cost of the war, which enables them to buy the weapons they want, which is one of the things Russia does not want Ukraine to be able to do. So the Rafale deal, I don't think, is the key reason. I think it more has to do with the $100 billion that they want to take out of Russia's pocket. But it's not the only sticking point. According to British journalists, Frank Wright has complained that the reality of war is going to be the ruin of British reputation, that a number of EU countries are responsible for protracting the crisis, which is not in the interest of Ukraine or Europe, the British Foreign Affairs journalist has told TASS. He thinks it's regrettable that nations in Europe, including Britain, have this grand strategy that relies on prolonging wars, so that even if it reaches a stage or does not of intervention, there's still the pursuit of the geostrategic goal, which has little to do with the interests of Ukraine, nor indeed those of the British people, or Germans or French, or anyone else for that matter. Well, we know who it's in the interests of. The war profiteers, the World Economic Forum, the military-industrial complex, the bankers, the alliance of NGOs that come in after wars, and the media industrial complex all want war because it gives them money, power, privilege. Particularly journalists who get paid to watch this dangerous situation, But this dangerous shadow casts silence over any discussion of sanity realism. Yeah, look at my views. People don't want sane discussion. That's a sad reality that I have to deal with. It doesn't matter what clickbaity titles or thumbnails or anything I put out there. The dumb will always want to be lied to. They will always want to be told, Ukraine, sloppy Ukrainia, does not matter to them what is really going on. And when reality crashes, they just go on to the next. They go back to climate change, animal rights, veganism, whatever cause to fill the void in their life, because they are vapid, okay? They are bored. And bored people are boring. Constantly looking for external validation. They call it excitement, but it's cope. It's a drug. And they ever increasingly copious amounts of drugs until they suddenly find themselves in a situation they cannot handle. Then they go, why didn't you stop? Protect me. Why didn't you stop? Protect me. But Trump wants a peace deal before giving security guarantees to Kiev. We knew already this was going to be one of the sticking points, but never underestimate Politico to make a mountain out of a molehill, that they want a security guarantee. Why? Because security guarantees got you into the Korean War, Vietnam War, Panama conflict, you name it, security guarantees. You have to protect this nation for the next 100 years, Britain. Why? Because Keir Starmer says so. It's like all these treaties. You have to take in all these refugees. Why? Because Roosevelt, Truman, and Clinton signed all these deals. But that's the past. No. This UN is forever. It rules over you. And so, you have Russian frozen assets, which the US wants to discuss before it institutes further sanctions. But there is a sanction package, I think, is sitting like with Trump having the option of the 500% sanctions on not just Russian oil, but the shadow fleet and countries on selling Russian oil. But according to TASS, the number of talking points has been reduced to 22. This is a new update, because I'm sure yesterday it was 26. Now, Zelensky's aide apparently upset because Andre put out a statement, Zelensky put out a statement, but then Donald Trump put out a statement that did not portray Kiev's, that US had not approved a deal that took Ukraine's security guarantees into consideration, or said that the US would guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty of all land claimed by Ukraine. So this also does not appear to match what Zelensky said. I think Zelensky said he was hopeful. I think this might be a language barrier, but it's still a huge mistake to make. But a man in his position should not be making public statements. I think he's making a play to sink Zelensky. We've seen this with the corruption scandals. We've seen this with now with multiple peace talks, that he's one of the instigators of trouble in Ukraine. But I think he's protected by British intelligence. But Yermak has often been accused of making inappropriate statements or wielding inappropriate influence over Zelensky and national policy. And it's true. Zelensky may not be the elected president, but he's still the accepted president of Ukraine. And that is enough to say that you are the employee, not the employer. You are not the representative of Ukraine. European Parliament also accepts that Zelensky is the president of Ukraine. So again, he should stick to running staff and not running policy. Particularly when he's friends with one of Zelensky's associates who's on the run. Although they love pointing out that it's Zelensky's friend, I swear. Now, Russia has ways of telling us things without directly telling us things. This is how they've often operated in the past. And they have made it clear that Steve Witkoff's visit to Russia is still on track. So all this drama about the peace plan is irrelevant. Russia is still willing to discuss the peace plan. There's no question. Right? Special envoys to come. They're still willing to discuss the peace plan. He's still on track to travel. This does delay the sanctions, of course. So no doubt Putin is delaying for time. But the longer this goes on, the more Putin will find out that there's no third army from Russia. There's no first army from Russia. They're all right. You've got the occupying forces here. You've got the occupying forces here. You've got the occupying forces here, here, and here. Keeping the 5 armies to keep China the largest prison camp in the world. And then you've got the central command with their army, basically to ensure if one of the 5 armies tries to step out of its boundaries, it gets crushed. Now there's tensions over Taiwan. There's tensions over Korea. There's tensions over the waterways between Korea. There's tensions in Southeast Asia over these islands, which anybody with a brain can see is right beside the Philippines. There's Cebu. Oh, I've been here to Cebu. Oh. There's where's Cebu City? Yeah, sorry. Right. There's that island there. That's Mactan. That's where the major airport is. And beside that is a tiny little island of Alango. Beautiful place. I've been to Alango. Been to a few places in the Philippines. But I do know that these islands, now, apparently they suddenly the 12th largest deposits of oil. Russia let out recently that the largest deposit of oil is actually in Antarctica. Oh, look at the size difference between the South China Sea and that. That's a lot. Wait, there's 2 Australias on this map. Don't confuse me, map. But this is a small amount of oil, but it's the only gas and oil that Ukraine has, sort of. They get a little bit of revenue from it, but mostly it's from pipelines. See, Ukraine is so overplayed its hand, and I don't see any deal that is going to save them from themselves. Ukrainians are the only ones who can save Ukraine. Okay? This is throughout history. When the Austrians and Hungarians formed an empire thinking that would save them, But it didn't. Because they invested might into might instead of right. Ukraine's made that mistake, okay? Europe has made that mistake. Might is necessary, but you don't invest in might and forget right. It's like Denmark and its so-called not socialism, and it's not the only one. These, universal health care and all this. It sounds on paper like right, until you realise that it's just a hidden tax to allow the exclusive few to overcapitalise on their skills and to basically drain you of resources, right? That it decreases spending power, it decreases the diversity of spending, right? If things are expensive unnecessarily, it decreases spending in other areas and thus just declines the middle class. But the poor, we do not care. The middle class, that is underwealth, it is bourgeoisie. And this is the problem. The indoctrination is not being countered. You see this, if the right does not do more to counter disinformation and start to promote, I mean, look what you did when you promoted Charlie Kirk. Now, of course, the momentum is slowing down because you are letting the left dominate the culture again. That's what they do. They terrorize and cause. You can't give up on Charlie Kirk's memory. You cannot let Ukraine get away with what it's gotten away with for the last decade. You can't let Biden get away with it. I know a lot of people are very upset right now. But and there's been the tragedy of the shooting of the 2 National Guardsmen. There's now victim blaming of the National Guardsmen by the left. People have to stand up and realise you are never going to convince the left, okay? You have to do what India did. Expel them. But you want to be shithole? Here you go. You go get pushed into Pakistan and you lot get pushed into Bangladesh. Bye-bye. You have to put the left on trucks to Mexico and say, you like it, the brand people, you go nip them with them and we'll never see you again. Bye-bye, blue states. All of you. Go, go, go. If you do not defend civilization, you lose civilization. That is it. Ukraine isn't defending civilization. You are not saving Ukraine by giving it guns. It's like suicide by cop. And as soon as this ends, you watch as they flood Ukraine with Indians. They're already flooding it with Indians. Modi's already lining up for opportunities. This is a war not just funded by China, not just funded by Russia. This war is also funded by India and Brazil to a small extent. Although Brazil and South Africa thought they were going to be selling arms and armoured cars, though both of them are in financial troubles right now. Lulu couldn't organise a raffle, and South Africa is so disorganised, they can't even have organised crime in South Africa. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Please support the channel and support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links to the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.